just a quick poll. Show of hands. How many of you have personally taken an antibiotic in the last year or know somebody who's taken an antibiotic in the last year? Not surprising. How many of those would you classify as serious infections? And I'll let you decide what that means to you.
Does prophylactic mean anything?
Not prophylactic, unless it's for surgery.
It was.
Okay, so surgical prophylaxis, I would say, is a serious use. So those of you who are raising your hands for serious infections.
Louder? Or do you
Louder.
Like?
Those of you who raised your hand for serious infections, I would say, probably be thinking about causes of death. So 100 years ago, if you had a serious infection or if you needed surgery, chances are good that you would have had a bad outcome with that. So if you got pneumonia in 1900, virtually 100% of the time you'll die. Not that way anymore. So if you look at 2010, you see that only one of the top 10 causes of death in this country in 2010 was an infection, compared to 1900 when 4 of them were, including the top 3. So what happened? There are a bunch of things that happened. You can point towards sanitation, especially clean water. You can point towards vaccines and how important those have been for public health. That's another ADA chat topic, by the way. Or you can point towards antibiotics. And today I'm going to talk about antibiotics. So that guy right there is Alexander Fleming, Sir Alexander Fleming. And he is the person who first discovered penicillin, the very first antibiotic, in 1928, because he had a messy lab. And if you look at it, you can see it. Stacks of plates. My lab looks like this whenever I'm actually doing stuff. So I tell people I'm trying to discover the next accidental Nobel Prize human-altering experience. But he discovered penicillin by accident. What happened was he left plates sitting out. And anyone who does this will tell you that if you leave plates sitting out, eventually you get contaminants that grow on it. And so this is from his paper. And all of these colonies down here, these are the bacteria he was trying to grow. And then this is a contaminant that he found on his plate. Now, why is this interesting? Why did this lead to the Nobel Prize? Well, he looked at this and thought, well, that's weird. Right around this contaminant, my colonies aren't growing as well. They're growing real well out here, but they're not growing well here. And he thought, why is that? So what you see here is a penicillium mold. And the reason that those bacteria weren't growing very well right around it is because that mold produces penicillin, shock of all shocks, based on its name. And so that was the beginning of the antibiotic era. So the antibiotic era began in 1928. First clinically used widespread antibiotics weren't till World War II. Penicillin was used extensively and basically exclusively by the military in World War II. And you look at the discoveries of new classes, and what I hope you notice, first of all, is that there was just a golden boom of novel new antibiotics, 40s, 50s, and up until the 60s. A lot of those are natural products. So stuff that might interest Dr. Kinder. Natural product antibiotics. And they slowed down a little bit coming into the 70s and the 80s. We're talking about more synthetic molecules. It's more difficult to do that. And in the last nearly 30 years now, there's been not one single novel class of antibiotics discovered. The discovery void. So no new antibiotics have been discovered since the late 1980s. So why are antibiotics unique? And I'm going to come back to why that matters here. And I want you to think about this for a second. The example I like to give when I'm in class, and some of you are pharmacy students, and so you've heard this before, my apologies, is let's say you have a patient and they have a heart attack. And they do all the right things. They call 911, they get all of the medical interventions that they get, and they live. So all of those drugs and medical interventions that they got saved their life. But at the end of the day, when they're discharged, they still have heart disease. And they're still going to have to take drugs for cholesterol and high blood pressure, probably for the rest of their life. So did it save their life? Yes. Did it cure them? No. Okay, so let's say you have a patient and they have pneumonia, and they do all the right things. They go to the doctor, they go to the emergency department, depending on how serious it is. They get a course of antibiotics, maybe a week, maybe 10 days. And the antibiotic saves their life. Remember, before antibiotics, virtually everyone who got pneumonia died. So it saves their life. And it's a cure, because when they leave the hospital, they don't have pneumonia anymore. That makes antibiotics unique among most drugs. They make much of modern medicine possible. So we talked about surgery at the beginning. Before antibiotics, there was anywhere from a 25% to a 90% chance that you would get an infection where they cut your skin to do surgery, and most people would die from those things. And look back, say to the history of the Civil War. It wasn't so much people dying on the battlefield as it was people dying as a result of wounds that couldn't be treated, or as a result of amputations that got infected and couldn't be treated. Antibiotics that we have today that work now will not work the same way in the future. We have a bunch of good antibiotics now. That's the truth. But you won't be able to use them in the same way in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And that makes them different too. You know, somebody who took aspirin 50 years ago, it works just as well for them as it does for you today. But somebody who took penicillin 50 years ago, it's not nearly as reliable today as it was then. And the reason for that is because bacteria become resistant over time. Everybody's use affects everybody else's subsequent use. So a kind of simple way to think about it that I like to keep in my head is a new antibiotic comes to market, and there are a finite number of times that that drug can be used for everybody before it becomes not reliable anymore. So if you take the antibiotic, it's less useful for the rest of us. More likely there's going to be some kind of mutation. Resistance will become much more common. Now, the last slide I showed that discovery void. There's no new antibiotics come to the market. And there are a variety of reasons why. There's not really money in it for the pharmaceutical industry. They want drugs that people have to take every day for the rest of their lives. That's how they make money. First thing that we do when we get a new antibiotic is everybody goes, yay, new antibiotic. And then we put it on the shelf and restrict its use. And even if it gets used for 10 days. So there's no money in it. That, and they're actually really hard to develop. So think about this. We're looking for a drug that kills cells. That kills cells, bacteria cells, but doesn't kill your human cells. That's tricky. Because if you get a drug that kills human cells, then you have, either a poison or cancer chemotherapy, something like that, which might be fine, but it's not an antibiotic. So antibiotics are unique. Now this was pretty recent, and I think it's kind of stark, and the numbers are a little bit mine. 80% of antibiotics used in humans are used outpatient, so used for people who aren't in hospitals. And I say in humans, that's important because the vast majority of antibiotics used are used in agriculture, in animals, and that's also another ADA chapter. 80% of those antibiotics are used in humans or used in outpatients. Of those, 30% are inappropriate for a variety of reasons. We touched on it at the beginning. I said, we don't use antibiotics for colds and flu. No, we should not. Unfortunately, we do. Somebody gets the sniffles, they go to the doctor gives them a prescription for an antibiotic, regardless of whether it's a virus or a bacteria, and they take it. That is an inappropriate antibiotic. 30% of outpatient antibiotics are inappropriate. So in 2011, there were 262 million outpatient antibiotic prescriptions dispensed in this country. 30% of those are inappropriate. That means that 79 million inappropriate antibiotic prescriptions were dispensed in 1 year in one country that has 5% of the world's population. I think that's a kind of dramatic number. I just like this. It's a bit of a simplistic way of saying what actually does happen. Not so much the cloak and dagger, here have this gene and you'll become resistant, but bacteria do this. So if one bacteria figures out how to become resistant to an antibiotic, It can pass that along to another bacteria. It doesn't have to be the same species. So this species over here mutates and becomes resistant. It can pass it to this species and this species and this species. You can get a massive problem. And this is really the problem that we're worrying about. So antibiotics were being discussed at very high levels these days. It's become a national priority. President Obama actually addressed the growing crisis of antibiotic misuse. The United Nations even recently sat down and talked about antibiotic misuse and the coming global threat of drug-resistant bacteria. So remember that there are no new antibiotic compounds that have been discovered, no new classes in 30 years. It takes 10 years minimum from discovery to human use. So if we don't collectively all do something about it, this is the projection of what deaths might look like in 2050. So deaths from resistant infections will overtake cancer, which right now is the #2 cause of death in the US. So that very first slide, number 1, 2, and 3 in 1900 were infectious, and we changed that. And if we don't alter the way that we're using antibiotics, specifically not using them for things that are inappropriate, so viral diseases, and also make it a national priority to develop novel antibiotics, we could be looking at complete reversion back to infectious causes of death being #1 by 2050, which scares me because that's in my lifetime for sure. Well, not for sure. I could get hit by a train over here in Ada, who knows? So that's it. I can entertain questions from you now, or I can wait till the end.
Questions? I have lots of questions for you, but I'll save them for later.
Okay.
Is that the drugs that have these places where you turn drugs in, the water supply, are those showing up? Can you actually find that in water supply?
Yes. So the question is, can you find antibiotics in water supplies, like the people
Yeah, I know. Sorry for the shock.
flushing them down the toilet? Or
At what level? Level enough.
The funny thing is promoting resistance, having really, really low concentrations is one way of really promoting resistance. So not high enough to have like massively kill off bacteria in a water supply, but enough to expose them to it. And that's all it really takes is a minor exposure. So that's the bad news. The good news is a lot of antibiotics aren't stable for long periods of time out in the environment. I have to keep all of them in the fridge. So many antibiotics will break down with heat and with light and with temperature and with time, but not all of them. So that's a good issue to bring up.
All the drugs that we take, which are mass amounts,
Yeah.
do those all break down? Do we excrete those out into the sanitary sewer system? Are they back into the environment?
Some drugs are. Those that are excreted as whole drugs can be. I think there was a study, somebody chime in if I'm wrong, about finding like measurable amounts of SSRI drugs that are used for depression and anxiety in most city water systems. Does that sound familiar? You're getting some thumbs up from people. So as long as the drug is excreted in a whole active form, yes, you can find any of those drugs in our water supply. Yeah.
So you mentioned that, I don't know if it was the pharmacists or the doctors that say, yay, new antibiotic, but you put it up on the shelf.
Yes.
But then you say it's overprescribed. So what leads to it being overprescribed?
It's the new antibiotics we protect. There's such a thing as an antibiotic stewardship program. So we, and when I say we, I mean people who specialize in infectious disease, physicians, pharmacists, advanced nursing staff, go yay, and we restrict them. It's the ones that have been around for a long time that get overused. Anyone who's ever worked in any community pharmacy will tell you that you dispense a ton of amoxicillin and Augmentin and Z-Packs. That's the big one for viruses. Everyone gets a Z-Pack. It's not hard to find that meme online where with Oprah and everybody gets a Z-Pack. it's those drugs, the ones that are more readily available in the community that get overused. The problem is that you can see cross resistance. So if I overuse drug X that's easily available in the community, that could very easily by mutation affect drug Y, Z, and this drug over here and that drug over here that are important to inpatient for serious infections, maybe a new drug.
All right. We all filled with fear.
I always tell my pharmacy students that I hold you personally responsible for this. If I die from a drug-resistant infection in 2050, I'm coming back to haunt you.
Some of us are really thankful for what you do. We wouldn't be here.